One of our earlier customers in Illinois was actually IKEA. So we built projects at the two IKEA stores back in 2012 before, solar was really big in Illinois. So those were some of the biggest installations in the state when they were installed. Now we've graduated with the adjustable block program in Illinois. We were able to build projects with FedEx, with Target Corporation, and we really see that Illinois, knock on wood, that we can get some more incentives, but it was a really great market, and have to give a shout out here to Continental for all the work that you all did.
The Solar Podcast is brought to you by Continental Energy Solutions. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Today on the Solar Podcast, solar is coming for your commercial roof, ground, or parking lot. My guest today is a repeat guest, Kristen Fornes with ENGIE Distributed Solar in Chicago. Welcome back to the show, Kristen.
Thank you so much, Tim. Happy to be here.
Happy 2021. Happy new administration in Washington. The wind is at our back now a little more than it was 6 months ago or whenever that was that we did our first interview. And if anybody wants to get more background on you, check out that interview where Kristen broke down some of her background, how she came to ENGIE, the SoCore ENGIE acquisition. And so check that out on our YouTube channel or on our website at cesnrg.com/podcast. So what is going on in the DG solar world, Kristen?
Well, Tim, I'll tell you what, it's been a very crazy year. So we're excited that we've made it to 2021, as I'm sure all of us are in the renewables business. But I'll tell you, 2020 was interesting for a number of reasons. I think everything that happened with the election, what happened with the extension of the ITCs, we were really kind of waiting there at the end of the year with bated breath, not sure what to expect, how things would go. So I thought it was, everything really worked out well, worked out in our favor. So we're really excited for 2021 and beyond. We see huge opportunity for solar and storage in the US. So we're excited.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the extension of the ITC. That was a gift. It was scheduled to step down from 26 to 22% here in January of 2021, but now is extended through 2023, which, as Jigger Shaw says, means it's really extended through 2025 because you can safe harbor and leverage the ITC for a few years past that. So for any, commercial industrial facility owners out there, look up the ITC because that's a real thing. That's a very generous tax credit on your solar project. It's like, it's like cash, a tax credit. If you have a tax liability, right, you get 26% of the project off. And so while solar is a major investment, it is not nearly as great when you have that ITC. So, and I'm glad that you mentioned solar and storage because that is all the rage, and the 2020s are going to be the decade of storage and including lithium ion technology, but also probably green hydrogen. I think we're going to see a lot more variability coming into the storage market, a lot more nuances. So it's a very exciting time. And but yeah, let's talk about what is a good opportunity for ENGIE Distributed Solar.
Tim, that's a great question. I think we're constantly evolving. And, since the business began 12 years ago, we started with 50 kW rooftop systems. And, we were so excited to build small projects, and really just seeing our evolution over the last 12 years. I think it's been great. We've learned a lot, but the focus now has been primarily on rooftop, ground mount, or carport projects at customer sites that are anywhere from 250 kW. I would say the largest project that we've built at a customer site is about 5 megawatts. Typically, we're limited by net metering rules or interconnection rules, or in markets like Massachusetts or New Jersey, we've seen congestion issues or, some issues on circuits because there is so much solar installed. So typically we're limited by those things before we're limited by the roof area, unfortunately. a lot of our customers tend to be large corporates that have distribution centers or large campus style facilities where they're looking for larger installations. So we really try to focus on that sector of the market, but recognize that there's still a lot of smaller customers that are looking for solar as well. So that's really our niche, I would say, is the 250 kW plus.
Yeah. Can we name some names of portfolios that you have done? We've done some big box work together here in Illinois. Can we get into some
Sure.
specifics?
Of course, yes. So one of our earlier customers in Illinois was actually IKEA. So we built projects at the 2 IKEA stores back in 2012 before, solar was really big in Illinois. So those were some of the biggest installations in the state when they were installed. Now we've graduated, and with the adjustable block program in Illinois, we were able to build projects with FedEx, with Target Corporation. And we really see that Illinois, knock on wood, that we can get some more incentives, but it was a really great market, and have to give a shout out here to Continental for all the work that you all did on helping us install those projects. I thought that, we really had a great partnership and had some great projects and great success together. So we're really hopeful that there'll be another round of this program here in 2022, and we can build even more projects together.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the adjustable block program. That is a boom and a bust. So that's a little bit of a bitter pill right now. But for anybody who doesn't know, they're looking at the IKEA Distribution Center behind me in Joliet, which is an ENGIE project that you guys developed and we did the construction on. That was the largest rooftop array in the Midwest for quite a while until Maggot Glove came along and eclipsed it. But it's very representative of the work that you're doing, large rooftop solar, and it offsets the customer's load, so they have a lower energy bill. If they own the asset, they have a much lower energy bill, or if they do a PPA, then they're saving maybe 10 or 20% off their energy bill while going green. So there's environmental benefits, of course, that they can then market to their consumers and their value chain and stakeholders. So solar is such a win-win-win. It's good for the environment, it's good for the economy, it's good for the bottom line of these major corporations, and which is why we see so many Fortune 500 companies, right, Kristen? Like you mentioned, Target and IKEA, and then all the big tech companies, the Googles and Facebooks and Amazons of the world are all going whole hog into solar, wind, and storage right now. So it really is very heady days. And so if you're a facility owner, though, what are some of the things that you want to think about right out of the gate, like the roof condition? Do you have the money to do a project, or what is involved from an owner's perspective in getting a project off the ground?
Sure, Tim, that's a great question. I think that's a good place to start. And I hate to say that a lot of building owners or customers don't really know where to start, and can kind of get pretty far down the line without identifying fatal flaws, and then be somewhat turned off by a solar or storage project because they weren't aware of some of these initial checklist items that they need to run through. So happy to run through them here. So I would say the first one that you mentioned, which is roof condition, is huge. So typically for rooftop solar, when you're installing all of these panels, the racking system, all of the AC, all of the wiring to get the system interconnected behind the customer's meter, you want to make sure that before you build a project like that, you can see a great example right behind you there, Tim, that the roof is going to be able to last long enough to either match that PPA contract, or if you're going to own the system, that you have at least 10 years remaining on that roof. And here's why, Tim. If you have to hire the solar company back to come out and remove that equipment, replace your roof, store the equipment, and then build the equipment back up, on the roof, it's a very expensive undertaking. And so typically we would want to look at that first before we get too excited about a project. The good news for customers is that there's a great strategy that you can employ to actually look at replacing your roof at the same time as building your solar project. So it's a good time to replace your roof. And then what do you know? You can see again behind you, the panels are actually protecting that membrane roof from the sun's UV rays, because that's what the system is collecting. That's what the panels are there to do. So I think it's a great opportunity before you install a solar project. If you have an older roof, perhaps it's 15 years old, it only has a 20-year warranty, or, it's more towards the end of its life, maybe even past the warranty, you'd want to look at a strategy to replace the roof before you build your project. The next thing, oh, sure, go ahead.
I like to say that old rooftops are the bane of my existence. I run into a lot of old roofs. Your roof, unless it's leaking, you forget about it, right? And it gets 20 years old very quickly.
Mhm.
And then you really don't want to put a solar array on it until you put a new membrane down, because the solar is going to be there for 25 years. It is tried and true technology that is designed to sit out there in the elements for that many years, and it will protect your new membrane and extend the life of the roof. It's not going to hurt the roof. It's going to
Mhm.
help the roof, but you need a roof that's 10 years old or less. That is a great rule of thumb.
Mhm.
So what else uh, do you have to think about? There is a structural component to this also. Do you run
Yep.
into facilities that can't hold a ballasted rooftop array?
Tim, we do. We're lucky we have a structural engineer in-house at ENGIE. So we will ask our structural engineer to evaluate the roof drawings as a, step two in the process. The structural engineer will make sure that there's, somewhere between 4 and 5.5 PSF remaining on the roof. We've built on roofs, and Tim, your company's worked with us on a couple roofs where the systems have to be only, perhaps 3.5 PSF, maybe closer to 3. And you can really achieve that with a fully attached system. It's not as ideal because it is a little bit more expensive, and also customers tend to not like roof attachments. They like, the less attachments, the better. So typically, as long as a roof has 5 PSF remaining, we're in good shape to install a ballasted system. The other big thing, though, that we run across is roof control. So a lot of commercial customers will lease their building from a landlord. They might have 15 or 20 years left on their lease, which is again great because then they can sign a 15-year solar PPA. But if they don't actually have control of that roof, then they need to go to their landlord for approval before we can build the project. We've seen a couple of examples, unfortunately, where the customer said, "Don't worry, it's our roof, we control it." We've started construction on a project, or we have a couple of examples of projects where we actually built the system, and then a year later the landlord said, "Hey, come remove this system, this is not your roof to build on." So those are extreme examples where,
Holy cow, yeah.
not doing that diligence in advance can really be a problem. So for any commercial customer, I would say just look at your lease, and that's something that we help our customers with, or you can ask your legal department to review your lease, and just make sure that you have control of the roof. And if you don't, make sure you ask your landlord for permission before you go into construction.
I'm so happy you brought this up, because that is the other major rule of thumb here, that owner occupied facilities are preferred. It is much simpler for an owner occupied facility because they control the roof. They can do whatever they need to do.
Mhm.
If you're leasing your facility, the other factor is that there may be multiple uh, companies that are buying power, or sorry, the meters may not be it may not be a straightforward metering situation if you're
Mhm.
in a warehouse. So anyway, owner occupied, or talk to your landlord early and often about it. Is happening. We do see companies like S&S Activewear, which is a retailer. They are solarizing their warehouse facilities around the country, and so they've done a deal with the warehouse owner, which is a national real estate company, and they're doing rooftop solar, and sometimes ground mount.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's a thing.
Hmm.
So let's say the roof is in good shape, or it's new construction. It it can hold the mechanical load of a solar array, which is not a lot, but it is 3 to 5 pounds additional. The snow load here in the Midwest is something like 20 pounds. That's the design load, 20 pounds per square foot. So, and sometimes they really only design to hold the snow and nothing else, in which case you'd go with an attached system to keep it very light. But what other considerations are there in terms of infrastructure and working with the utility?
Yeah, that's really the next step, is looking electrically at what the infrastructure is of the facility. So we have a full team of electrical engineers internally that would evaluate the customer's electrical drawings. They would put together a plan for interconnection. They would make sure that there was a spare breaker for us to interconnect the system. Sometimes there isn't. And then before you put a budget together, you just need to make sure you understand, number one, where you're interconnecting the system, because if it's a big roof like the one behind you, it could be 1,000 feet from the system where you have your interconnection point. Or you might find that you need to add a lot of equipment or upgrade equipment before you can do your interconnection. That can add cost to your budget, but your solar developer can help with that. On the utility side, this is another interesting thing, because there is so much solar in markets like Illinois now. But especially in the Northeast and in California, when you go through the interconnection process, it isn't common to find that there are upgrades that might be required from the utility before you can get your interconnection agreement and interconnect your system. So a great example in Illinois, we have a couple of projects that we're developing that we hope to build, fingers crossed, when this next round of this program comes out. But it was interesting, in both examples of some of these new projects that we have, the utility ComEd came back and is requiring some upgrades before we can interconnect the system. So it's good to understand if there are any upgrades required before you finalize your agreement with your customer, because the customer then would want to know if the PPA price or the installation price is going to be higher. That could change their decision if they want to still build the project. Especially in Illinois, as you know, the price to compare for retail electricity is fairly low for these big customers. So, adding in $500,000 worth of upgrades on a 2 megawatt project could be problematic for the project.
Yeah, the most common upgrade that we see required is transformer upgrades, right? So you have if you have a big facility, you have a transformer on the ground, typically right outside where the electric room or electric panel is inside, and that box is sitting there, and it's stepping down the voltage that's coming from the distribution grid, um, or potentially stepping it up. But anyway, that that box has to be able to handle the backfeed of solar power that might happen, right? When the facility isn't, let's say on a Sunday afternoon, if your facility is closed and the sun is shining, then that power is typically just feeding back onto the grid, right? If it's not being consumed locally. And, luckily, we haven't had a lot of projects that uh, get killed because of transformer upgrades, but we've definitely had them, and it does slow things down, and it does add cost to the project. So that is something that the solar developer will work with the utility on in the first 6 months of a project, vetting the project and getting it ready, so to speak. You have to get an interconnection agreement with the utility, right? When you want to attach a solar array to your facility, the utility um, is responsible for a safe and functional grid. And you're now installing a solar array, which is a power plant, which is becoming part of their grid. So it's appropriate for them to, of course, scrutinize the project, and hopefully not um, jerk you around too much. There have been some complaints right here in Illinois of utilities charging what developers consider to be exorbitant fees for upgrades to the grid, especially around community solar. I think there were some complaints, but um, and hopefully that's not a harbinger of things to come. It is still very early days in Illinois, and so it that first wave of, we got a wave of 666 megawatts of distributed generation connected to the grid. Not all of it is energized just yet, but soon will be. And now we're waiting for more incentives to flow into the market. That's going to happen in 2022, hopefully. We don't know exactly. The IPA, the Illinois Power Agency here in Illinois, is the authority running that program, and they can't say. So let's talk a little bit about markets. And if you're in, does solar work in any place in the US, or is it that it works better in some places?
Yeah, Tim, that's a great question. Electrically, and if you look at the sun, it shines in all 50 states. So solar does work in all 50 states. However, for customers, typically, if they're going to own a system, they're looking for a payback period that is somewhere less than 7 years for most C&I customers. And I would say that most CFOs are looking for a payback period less than 5. And for customers that need a shorter payback period, we come across some who say, hey, we need 2 or 3 years. Really, the best option for them is to look at a PPA or a solar lease. So with a PPA or a solar lease, you have no capital outlay on behalf of the customer. So they're basically coming to the developer, and the developer will build, own, and operate the system on their roof or on their facility. And then that developer will charge a PPA rate, which is determined by the cost of the installation, the irradiance that the system will receive. So you get more power, obviously, in a state like Arizona than you would in a state like Illinois. And then also they're looking at the build cost of the project. They're going to plug in all of the incentives, and then that's how they really calculate that PPA price. And then the other factor here is that the cost of power is so different all over the US. So, Illinois might get as much sun as, let's say, New Jersey, but the cost of power in New Jersey is actually significantly higher than it is in Illinois. The incentives are also different. So your PPA price is going to be different. Your return on your project is going to be different. So for customers, then they're looking for a PPA price year one, typically that's going to save them money. So there's only about 15 states right now where customers will save money when you run that equation and you present a PPA price. So typically these markets change as the incentives change. So a good example is Illinois. There were incentives that would cause the PPA price to be less than what a customer was paying for power. So they want to invest, they want to do projects. But when there's no incentive like we have here in 2021, the PPA price without that incentive factored in is higher than their cost of power. So they're not interested in doing a project without the incentive, which makes financial sense or doesn't make financial sense. So I would say there's about 15 states right now that do work where we can get the customer's PPA price below their cost of power. Some markets you can save 20, 30%. Some markets you can only save 5. It also just depends on what tariff they're on. So a lot of factors here, but all this to say that solar is very dynamic. These markets are changing. So that's why it's really important to have a developer partner that understands these markets and the timing. And then, you'll have a successful solar program. So that's how we've been successful working with our customers, is really looking at these markets and the timing and developing projects to make sure we can meet the timing needed.
So as of right now, here we are in mid to late January 2021. In the Midwest, we have good solar markets in Illinois, Minnesota, Ohio. Not so much for distributed generation in Indiana. There is a lot of utility solar happening in Indiana, but not a lot of DG, right? Not a lot of rooftop solar. Can't even do a PPA in Indiana.
I know.
It's just such a bummer. I'm a Hoosier by birth. I would love to do some solar projects in Indiana. And what about Michigan? How is, yeah, and you're talking to us today from Michigan. What's the
Yeah.
DG market like in Michigan?
Yep. From I'm near Mackinac City, so very close to the UP here. So in Michigan, it's also challenging for a number of reasons. If a customer is in consumers energy territory, which is where I am right now, consumers is primarily the entire lower peninsula outside of Detroit, which is Detroit Edison or DTE Energy. In consumers, for behind the meter projects, they have a very low net metering threshold. So what that means is, in order for a customer to get a credit for any kilowatt hour they don't consume when it's being produced, they can only build a system up to about I think it's like 200 or 250 kW. So it's really not that attractive for the larger customers, because a project of that size on a really large roof, it's not going to save a lot of money. And then their cost of power here is fairly low, so there's no incentive to help make up that difference. So unfortunately, it hasn't been a great state when it comes to customer sided solar projects. But interestingly enough, the utility, again consumers, has a very aggressive plan. They're looking to add something like 6 or 9 gigawatts of solar projects before 2030, which is really aggressive. But these are going to be primarily utility owned projects that'll be utility scale, or they're going to be looking for PPAs from utility scale projects that developers will own. So you're talking about projects that are going to be somewhere between 100 and 300 megawatts a piece. So unfortunately, that doesn't leave a lot of room for behind the meter projects, but we're hopeful that with the extension of the ITC and the continual decline of the cost of installations and all of the material components for these projects and the increased efficiency in the panels, that eventually we will be able to make some projects make financial sense for our customers.
And what about Wisconsin? What is the DG market like in Wisconsin?
Wisconsin's been interesting. I've heard of a couple of larger distributed projects, customer sided behind the meter projects that have been successful. I think they did have a recent change between, PPAs not being allowed. I think now there's a couple markets, a couple utility territories where you can now do a PPA in Wisconsin. So that helps. But still, the cost of power is very low. As you know, the irradiance is even lower than in Illinois. So, quite a bit less sun. They're further north. And then there's really no incentive program to speak of for these larger C&I customers. So it's a tougher market for projects to make sense. But interestingly enough, on the utility side, we've been super active in Wisconsin. We have a number of projects that we built a couple years ago with Dairyland Power Cooperative. And these are smaller, like 1 to 3 megawatt distributed scale projects, distribution connected up in Wisconsin. And then we've heard, there's an active RFP right now that Alliant has out. So I think, Wisconsin, they're coming up the curve. I could see, in the next couple of years, that could be a very interesting market. Again, costs come down and panels get more efficient. That's going to help us even more.
Yeah. I think this can be a little confusing for commercial and industrial facility owners, that there are really two markets. There's the distributed generation market that we've been talking about here, that what we call rooftop solar, which is, 100 kW to a couple of megawatts. And then there's utility scale. And then there's small utility, which is kind of the in between with community solar. Here in Illinois, we have a 3 megawatt community solar market. Those markets tend to be 1 to 5, some a little larger. I think Maine has a 10 megawatt community solar market, but then you're in 100 to 3 or 400 megawatt, and that stuff is happening en masse across the Midwest. That is truly booming, but it's a completely different market. And of course, ENGIE does play in that space, right? You have a whole division that does nothing but utility scale wind and solar
Mhm.
and battery storage projects. So it is a win-win. And eventually, companies like us will get into the larger projects, but it's going to be an evolution. What other? But let's talk about some other. Let's go east, looking east and maybe south. Of course, there's there's some very popular markets like New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, which are quite mature and have good incentives. Are you going after DG projects in those places?
We are. Those have been very hot markets for some time and continue to be great. So, a couple of examples in New Jersey, the TREC program, which was a transitional program from their SREC program, and then their successor program, which should be announced perhaps next quarter, pays $152 a megawatt hour for
Holy
15
cow.
years. So that program is extremely lucrative. You hear about $0 PPAs in that market because the incentive is so large. So we're expecting that that's going to continue to be a great market for us for quite some time because the successor program, we hope will be very attractive. Another great market is New York. So we're seeing a ton of opportunities in New York for solar and solar plus storage for behind the meter projects. So they have a program called VETR for distributed projects that basically replace net metering, but helps to give value for any kilowatt hour that goes back to the grid for behind the meter projects. So the VETR program has really been fantastic for DG projects. And then going north, Maine, you mentioned the community solar program. So 5 megawatt projects, so 5 megawatts AC per project, and customers can subscribe to the entire project, which is unique. Most community solar programs require multiple customers per project, so it can be tough to get a lot of scale. When you have to go look for projects and can only sign up for 100 or 200 kW at a time. So that market's been great. We're developing a number of projects in Maine. We're super excited about the Maine program. And I think there's also a lot of support for that program, in the state. If you've ever been to Maine, you know that it's a very sustainability focused state. They love their outdoors, and it's just been a great place, I think, for support for solar projects. So we're super excited about Maine and this community solar program.
And then what about down into the Atlantic states, like Maryland, Delaware,
Yeah.
Virginia?
Hmm.
Virginia, has a 100% RPS now.
Hmm.
And I've had some discussions with Dominion is the big utility there.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
what about the Southeast and the Mid-Atlantic?
So Mid-Atlantic, you mentioned Maryland. I think that's been somewhat of a roller coaster of a market because it's the SRECs have really changed over time in value. So that's the primary incentive for a solar project in Maryland is selling the SRECs, and that market has really, it was very high at one point, close to $120 a megawatt hour. And went down to $20-$30 a megawatt hour. Now I think it's back up again. I think the last time I checked, maybe in the $80 range. So, improving, but still somewhat of a roller coaster. And then Virginia, you mentioned, yes, this is a very interesting market. So we'd played in Virginia for quite some time on the utility scale side, but now with their new RPS goal, 100% renewable energy by 2050, we see a huge opportunity for DG and behind the meter customers. So there is a carve out for customer sited behind the meter projects, which again is great because if you look at a state like Michigan, like we talked about, where there's huge goals, but really no opportunity for small customers or customers to get involved behind the meter with their projects, Virginia is the opposite. So with this carve out, customers will be able to participate, and they are specifically looking for projects that are 1 megawatt and less. And I think the RFP came out this week. So, pretty exciting. And if you look at the schedule there, they've got a nice, healthy rollout plan to create a market. so that you don't have this boom and bust type of a scenario like you described that we experienced in Illinois. So we're very excited about Virginia, and I think it's a great place for customers to look. And if they're not interested behind the meter, they just want to do a 1 to 3 megawatt system on their roof. If they have a big roof, they could sell all the power to the utility. There's another program for that. So there's really a lot of options for smaller customers in Virginia.
You mentioned an RFP in Virginia for behind the meter. Is that right?
Yes, so it's systems that are 1 megawatt and less. They're looking for basically small projects that they'll be purchasing the RECs from the projects. So this will start to tease out a market for smaller DG projects. Those projects don't have to compete with that larger 1 to 3 megawatt size project, which is great, because if you have a 500 kW rooftop system, the cost to install is quite a bit higher than a 3 megawatt ground mount system. So, you can't really compete in a RFP type situation to get these renewable energy credits sold to the utility if you have to compete with larger ground mount projects and you only have a 500 kW to a 1 megawatt size roof. So that's the great thing about how they're kind of carving out different programs to suit their different customers.
Cool. Well, what other markets are on your radar around the country for rooftop solar?
So rooftop solar, I want to say that California has always continued to be, a mainstay for us. We've been successful year over year, developing great projects in California. The net metering program there has really helped. They've got a great program, 4 megawatt projects and less. So that's really great for larger customers, because typically they're limited to 1 or 2 megawatts by the net metering program. So California has been great from that regard. Another market that we're really excited about that seems to be gaining some traction is Florida. So interestingly enough, we've successfully installed a couple of projects in Florida. No PPAs are allowed, but you could do a lease, but it's still very challenging. So we've had some success with customer-owned projects in Florida.
That's news to me. I think of Florida as an anti-DG state.
It
Florida
still
Power and
is.
Light is quite famous for squashing DG. There is a lot of utility scale happening also in Florida.
Mhm.
So, but is there net metering in Florida?
So it really depends on the utility. The projects that we've installed are behind municipal utilities. So what that
Okay.
means is it's a smaller city-owned utility. We have not built a project behind Florida Power and Light. I think your example with that utility is great. So they were really leading the charge against allowing leases in Florida, and opening up net metering and some of these other programs that allow solar projects to make financial sense for customers. So I can't say that we're ready to try to take the charge and build a project there. We've been focusing mostly on some of these muni utilities, and they seem to be a little bit more amenable to solar projects. And if it's a local customer that has a big local presence, then it's a win-win.
Yeah, that's the other oddity about the grid, right? Is that sometimes there's a big area that has one utility, like Northern Illinois. Most of it is covered by Commonwealth Edison. Here in Central and Southern Illinois, though, it's more like Swiss cheese. And while we have a big utility with Ameren, Illinois, we also have many municipal utilities and cooperatives, and they have their own rules.
Mhm.
So you have to really get to know the individual utilities and learn the rules. Unfortunately, here in Illinois, many of those co-ops and munis are quite restrictive about distributed generation, so it doesn't pencil very well, which is a bummer. But
Mhm.
someday. Um,
Exactly.
and what about Texas? I hear a lot about Texas with utility scale, but is there a DG market in Texas?
Yeah, Texas is our biggest market on the utility scale side. I think we've now either have under construction or have commissioned about a gigawatt and a half of projects in Texas. So that's our biggest market for utility scale wind and solar. But for DG, you're right, it's been very challenging. Again, though, with these muni utilities, we've had some really great success. So a recent success story with Austin Energy, we did install a 2.3 megawatt canopy system at the Austin airport. So next time you fly into the airport and you see the canopy system up on top of their parking structure, that's a system that ENGIE installed. CPS in San Antonio actually has a 900 megawatt RFP on the street looking for solar and storage. So they're looking for smaller distributed projects in their service territory, and they have a carve out again for smaller DG. And then they're also looking for storage. So no opportunity in that RFP for customer sited projects, but again, just an example of how some of these municipal utilities are trying to figure out a way, to build out a solar program. But the interesting thing is that the sites that we're submitting are all C&I customer sites. So we've got a rooftop solar project. It's a 4.5 megawatt project that we're going to submit. We'll see if we're selected. Hopefully we are, and we'll have some great news to share there. But in that case, C&I customer can benefit by being a host site, and then the power is sold to the utility. So they can make, still have a solar project. They can make, some rent by renting their roof to the solar developer. So that's a way that C&I customers can participate even in a market like CPS, where it's not as straight behind the meter project.
So let me understand that if you have a large roof, you can lease your roof to a developer, they build a solar array, and then that is like a community solar array, or what? Who is buying the power from that project then?
The utility. So it's
Okay.
it's not a community solar array. The utility is buying all the power. It's connected to their distribution system. But the benefit to the C&I customer is that they would get a roof rental payment for being a host site. So so we're doing that with solar. We're doing that with storage. We're pretty excited about the options there. But in some of these utilities where you can't do plain behind the meter project, it's a great option.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Rooftops are just sitting there, right? Baking in the sun all year round. And yeah, they're protecting your facility, but you could monetize your rooftop with a distributed solar project, either through behind the meter solar, where you're then reducing your power bill, or in this case, selling the power to a utility and getting some rent from that real estate. So you're monetizing your rooftop and then contributing to the clean energy transition, which is so important to stop global warming and clean the air. I mean, over 1 million people die from air pollution every year. I think globally it's several million people. So it's, this energy transition is real and it is happening. You can't stop that train, as we saw with the Trump administration, right? They didn't really help the industry, but they certainly didn't slow it down. It continued
No,
to grow. And now we're just going to really accelerate into the energy transition. There are some estimates that we might do 25 gigawatts of solar in the US this year. And, last year, what are we at? Maybe 16, something like that. So we're really stepping on the gas with solar, wind, and storage in the US right now. Well, how can our listeners find you, Kristen?
sure. You could find me on LinkedIn, Kristen Fornes, or my email address is kristen.fornes@ng.com. Happy to connect on LinkedIn. Happy to chat if anybody has questions. I'm think like you, very invested in this industry and this business. So happy to chat and strategize with a customer or partner developer. We're excited to be a leader in this transition, as you said, and we're here to support. Climate change doesn't take a vacation day. So, we're here to do everything we can, like you said, to help with these exciting goals.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to make a few announcements. We bring you the Solar Podcast twice a week. Uh, and if you go to cesnrg.com/podcast, you'll see all of our content there. Interviews with manufacturers like Axis, that is making a single axis tracker. Single axis trackers are really storming the industry now. And topics like agrivoltaics with Tom Karras from Minnesota Native Landscapes, where you can put sheep and other livestock on your solar array. You can plant it with native plants, so it's good for water quality, it's good for wildlife and pollinators, and it's just a win-win. And then thought leaders like Jigar Shah with Generate Capital, who came on a couple weeks ago to talk about the $1 trillion wealth creation opportunity that clean energy represents. And then we geek out on technology like DC coupled storage with Anand Fishman from AlanCon. Most people know about AC coupled storage, but DC coupled storage is a growing phenomenon. So check us out at cesnrg.com. Please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. And we are always looking for guests. So if you know a subject matter expert, please reach out to me. I love to bring new entrepreneurs and solar developers, installers, manufacturers, financiers, really anybody in the clean energy industry. We will consider bringing them on the show. So please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm TG Montague on Twitter as well. I want to thank Kristen Fornes with ENGIE Distributed Solar for coming on the show today. Thank you, Kristen.
Thanks, Tim. Have a good one.
Let's grow solar and storage. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Have a great day, everybody.